The man on his knees did not beg. Blood ran from his split lip, dripping off his chin and darkening the concrete beneath him. Silver cuffs bit into his wrists, the metal humming faintly against his skin. A black hood covered his face, tied tight at the neck. He was motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. "Last call," the auctioneer barked, voice echoing off the damp warehouse walls. "Alpha, violent history, confirmed kill record, no legal protection. Starting price just dropped." No one raised a paddle. Around the makeshift stage, the crowd shifted uneasily. Cigarette smoke curled toward the rafters. Neon light flickered from a cracked sign outside the docks, bleeding through broken windows and striping the room in sickly blue and red. The auctioneer spat on the floor. "Fine. If no one wants him, we'll ship him to extraction. Organs still fetch a decent price." A murmur rippled through the room. The man on his knees did not react. Not to the word extraction. Not to the threat of death. He remained still, like a weapon set down, waiting. From the back of the crowd, someone stepped forward. "I'll take him." The voice was clear, too soft for the room, too steady. Heads turned. Oliver Vale swallowed and forced himself not to retreat under the weight of 100 stares. He wasn't supposed to be here. Omega scents were masked in places like this for a reason. The auctioneer blinked. "You?" Oliver stepped closer to the light. "Yes." A ripple of laughter spread through the warehouse. "He'll snap your neck in an hour. Kid doesn't even know what he's buying." The auctioneer leaned forward, studying him. "You got the money?" Oliver reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. Everything he had left. His hands did not tremble. "I'm not paying starting price," he said calmly. "You already said you're sending him to extraction. That means he's a loss to you." The auctioneer's smile thinned. "He's dangerous. So is a lawsuit if someone reports this facility," Oliver replied evenly. "You don't want attention." Silence fell heavier this time. The auctioneer looked down at the kneeling Alpha. No one wanted damaged goods. No one wanted a liability. He snatched the envelope from Oliver's hand and weighed it. "Fine. Sold." A few people booed. The hooded man remained kneeling as two handlers unlocked the chain from the stage ring and shoved him toward Oliver. Up close, the Alpha was larger than he had looked from a distance. Broad shoulders, thick muscle under torn fabric. A presence that made the air feel tighter. Oliver lifted his chin. "I'll take the contract," he said. The paperwork was simple. Transfer of temporary custody. 6 months. No accountability from the seller. The handlers cut the rope binding the Alpha's ankles and shoved him forward again. He staggered. Just slightly. Weak from drugs, Oliver realized. Good. That made this possible. When the hood was finally pulled off, the room went quieter than before. The Alpha's hair was dark, matted at the temples. A thin cut split his eyebrow. His jaw was sharp, expression blank, but his eyes, they were not wild. They were not broken. They were cold, assessing, like he had already calculated the distance to every exit in the building. For one heartbeat, those eyes locked onto Oliver. Something shifted. Not fear. Not rage. Recognition of a variable. Oliver held his gaze. "You're coming with me," he said. The Alpha did not answer, but he followed. 3 days earlier, Oliver stood in a glass office 30 floors above the city, staring at a contract that would ruin his life. Ethan Vance lounged behind the desk, cufflinks glinting. "Your father's debt has matured," Ethan said mildly. "I'm feeling generous." Oliver's jaw tightened. "You don't want the money." Ethan smiled. "Correct." He slid a second document across the desk. "A marriage contract." "Sign," Ethan said. "I clear every debt. Your house remains yours. Your brother stays in school." "And if I don't?" Ethan's tone didn't change. "I repossess the house. Freeze your family's accounts. Your brother's scholarship disappears." Oliver's stomach twisted. "You have 3 days," Ethan finished. Don't make me enforce it. There was one legal loophole. Oliver found it after hours of digging through municipal code. An omega under registered alpha protection could not be forcibly engaged. It didn't require love. It required a binding contract. But no reputable alpha would risk offending Ethan Vance for a stranger, which left only one option: the Black Dock Exchange. Back in the present, Oliver guided the alpha through narrow alleyways toward his apartment near the harbor. The man's steps were heavy but controlled. Not stumbling, not dragging. He was conserving strength. Oliver unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small, clean. One bedroom, a worn couch. He closed the door and locked it. Only then did he turn around fully. The alpha stood near the entrance, silent, watching. Up close, the silver cuffs were visible, embedded with inhibitors. Oliver moved cautiously. "I'm going to remove those." No response. He knelt and worked the key into the mechanism. When the cuffs fell away, the room felt different. Larger. Charged. The alpha flexed his wrists slowly. Testing. He could overpower Oliver in seconds. They both knew it. Oliver stood. "Before you decide whether to kill me," he said calmly, "listen." The alpha's eyes narrowed slightly. "I need 6 months. That's it. You sign a protection contract. Appear in public twice. Stand behind me if anyone questions it. Silence. You don't touch me unless I consent," Oliver added. "I don't control you. After 6 months, you walk away." The alpha's voice, when it finally came, was low and rough from disuse. "Why?" "Because someone thinks he owns me," Oliver replied. "And I refuse." A pause. Then, "You know what I am?" "Yes." The alpha tilted his head slightly. "And what is that?" "A man who was betrayed," Oliver said. "Not a monster." Something flickered behind those cold eyes. Barely visible. Then gone. The alpha stepped closer. Oliver did not step back. "If I sign," the alpha said quietly, "you become leverage." "I already am," Oliver replied. Silence stretched. Finally, the alpha extended his hand. "Alexander." Oliver stared at it for half a breath, then took it. "Oliver." Alexander's grip was warm, strong, controlled, not crushing, not gentle. A handshake. Contract without ink. Outside, somewhere down at the docks, a siren wailed. Inside the small apartment, a far more dangerous agreement had just been made. Neither of them knew yet that the envelope Oliver had handed over that night would do more than cancel a wedding. It would reopen a war, and the alpha he had bought to save himself was the most lethal thing in the city. And now he belonged, at least on paper, to Oliver Vale. Alexander did not sleep that night. Oliver knew because every time he shifted beneath his thin blanket on the couch, he could feel it. The awareness in the room, sharp and watchful. Not restless. Not anxious. Calculating. The kind of presence that never fully powered down. Oliver stayed in his bedroom with the door half open, telling himself it was practical. If Alexander decided to leave, he would hear it. If Alexander decided to kill him, he would also hear it. The fact that neither happened by morning felt like a fragile victory. Sunlight leaked through the blinds in pale strips. Oliver stepped into the living room dressed for work and found Alexander exactly where he had left him. Sitting upright on the couch, elbows on his knees. The silver inhibitor marks still ringed his wrists, angry and dark. Without the hood and chains, he looked less like damaged goods and more like something coiled, contained but not harmless. "There's coffee," Oliver said quietly, gesturing toward the kitchen. Alexander's gaze followed the motion before returning to Oliver's face. "You're not afraid," he observed. His voice was steadier now. Oliver poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "I am," he replied honestly. "But fear isn't useful." He handed one over. Their fingers brushed. Heat flared briefly at the contact. Not violent, just electric. Alexander took the mug but didn't drink. "You understand," he said. That people don't sell alphas like me without reason. You understand, Oliver countered, that I didn't buy you without one. The legal office was on the other side of the district, tucked between a tax firm and a pawn shop. Oliver had already arranged the paperwork with a clerk who asked no questions as long as fees were paid in cash. Alexander walked half a step behind him on the sidewalk. Not touching, not crowding, but unmistakably present. Heads turned. Alphas on the street registered him instinctively. He carried himself differently now that the cuffs were off, still controlled but no longer diminished. In the office, the clerk pushed the contract forward. Temporary alpha protection, she recited without looking up. 6 months. Mutual termination clause permitted. No biological claim unless voluntarily enacted. Alexander's eyes flicked briefly toward Oliver at that last line. Oliver met his gaze without flinching. No biological claim, Oliver confirmed. The pen hovered in Alexander's hand for a second too long. Then he signed. The clerk stamped the document. Effective immediately. It was that simple. A signature. A seal. Oliver exhaled slowly. When they stepped back outside, the city felt different. It's done, Oliver said. You're legally my alpha. Alexander's mouth curved faintly at that. Careful, he murmured. That sentence can mean very different things. Oliver looked straight ahead. In this case, it means Ethan Vance can't force a marriage. Ethan called within an hour. Oliver let it ring once before answering. You've made a mistake, Ethan's smooth voice said without greeting. I exercised my legal right, Oliver replied calmly. Your petition for engagement has been suspended. Silence crackled over the line. Then, do you think hiding behind some stray alpha protects you? Oliver glanced sideways at Alexander, who stood near the window, watching the street below. He's not a stray, Oliver said. He's under contract. Ethan's tone sharpened. Contracts can be challenged. Not without cause. Another silence. Colder. I will find one, Ethan said softly before hanging up. Alexander turned away from the window. He won't stop. I know, Oliver said. But he can't act publicly without risking exposure. And privately? Alexander asked. Oliver didn't answer immediately. Alexander stepped closer, close enough that Oliver could feel the difference in air pressure between them. You just painted a target on yourself, Alexander said quietly. You were the one who needed protection. I still do, Oliver replied. That hasn't changed. He hesitated. You can leave if you want. The contract doesn't chain you. Alexander studied him for a long moment. If I leave, he said, you'll be alone. Yes. And you'd still refuse him? Yes. Something unreadable flickered across Alexander's face. Then I'm not leaving. That evening, Oliver returned from work to find the apartment subtly altered. The loose window latch had been repaired. The back hallway light replaced. The old lock on the fire escape reinforced. Alexander sat at the kitchen table cleaning a small blade with methodical precision. You don't have to fortify the place, Oliver said, setting down his bag. It's not about fortifying, Alexander replied without looking up. It's about removing weaknesses. Oliver leaned against the counter, watching him. You really were a professional. I was efficient, Alexander corrected. There's a difference. Oliver folded his arms. How many? Alexander's hand stilled. That's not part of the contract. I know. A beat. But I'd like to know who's living in my apartment. Silence thickened between them. Finally, Alexander sheathed the blade. Enough, he said. Enough to understand that most of them deserved it. Most. Alexander's eyes lifted slowly. No one survives that life without collateral damage. Oliver held his gaze. And the one you refused? A muscle shifted in Alexander's jaw. A witness. Teen. Wrong place. Wrong family. You walked away, Oliver said. Yes. That's why you're here. It wasn't a question. Alexander didn't confirm it, But he didn't deny it either. Later that night, tension in the apartment coiled tighter. Oliver could feel it in the way Alexander's breathing changed, subtle, uneven. The inhibitor drugs were wearing off. Alpha's recovering from suppression could become volatile. Oliver stepped into the living room. "Are you in pain?" Alexander's eyes were darker now. "It will pass." He stood, perhaps too quickly. The proximity shrank. Oliver felt it. The weight of Alexander's presence, instinctive and magnetic. His pulse quickened. Not fear. Something else. Alexander inhaled sharply, then stepped back as if restraining himself. "You should keep your distance tonight." Oliver didn't move. "Why?" "Because I haven't been myself in months," Alexander said quietly. "And you are," he trailed off. Oliver stepped forward deliberately until their chests nearly brushed. "I'm what?" Alexander's hand lifted, hovering near Oliver's waist but not touching. "A risk," he finished. Oliver placed his own hand over Alexander's suspended one and pressed it gently against his side. "Then learn control." For a second, neither of them breathed. The air felt thick, charged. Alexander's fingers tightened, but only slightly. Not possession. Not dominance. Awareness. Oliver tilted his face upward. "We agreed," he whispered. "No biological claim." Alexander's voice dropped lower. "I remember." "Then don't run from it." Their foreheads touched first. Slow. Testing. The kiss that followed was measured but real, warm and deliberate. No desperation. No loss of control. When they separated, Alexander's restraint remained intact. But his walls had cracked. Outside, somewhere in the city, Ethan Vance was already making calls. And in a different part of town, word had begun to circulate through quieter channels that a certain former asset of Cade's syndicate had resurfaced. But inside the small apartment by the harbor, the danger felt distant for one more night. Oliver rested his head briefly against Alexander's chest, listening to the steady beat beneath his ear. Alexander's hand settled at Oliver's back, firm and protective without tightening. The contract had been signed for protection. Neither of them had expected the first true risk would be letting someone close enough to matter. The first sign that something had shifted was not a phone call or a threat. It was the car, black, parked across the street from Oliver's building. Engine off. Windows tinted. It had been there the previous evening when Oliver returned from work. It was still there the next morning. Alexander noticed it before Oliver did. "Don't look directly," Alexander murmured from behind him as they stood at the kitchen window. His voice was calm, but his body had already changed, subtle tension threading through his shoulders. "Third floor sightline. Driver seat occupied." Oliver kept his gaze on his coffee mug. "Ethan?" "No," Alexander said quietly. "Different posture." "How can you tell?" "They're not pretending to be casual." A faint, humorless smile tugged at Oliver's mouth. "That's reassuring." Alexander moved away from the window and began checking the apartment with silent efficiency: hallway, fire escape, bathroom vent. Oliver watched him, noticing how seamlessly he slipped into that mode. Not frantic, not paranoid, just precise. "You think it's them," Oliver said. Alexander didn't answer immediately. "If Ethan investigated my background, he would have found sealed records. But Cade's syndicate doesn't seal things. They erase them." He met Oliver's eyes. "If they know I'm alive, they won't wait long." The knock came that afternoon. 3 sharp raps. Not impatient. Not aggressive. Confident. Oliver's heart kicked hard once, but he didn't hesitate. "Stay back," Alexander said under his breath. Oliver opened the door halfway. 2 men stood in the hallway. Alphas, dressed in neutral gray coats. Clean. Professional. "Oliver Vale?" the taller one asked. "Yes. We'd like a word about your tenant." Alexander stepped into view behind Oliver. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop. Recognition flickered across the taller man's face. So the rumors were true. Alexander's expression didn't change. You're trespassing. We're offering courtesy, the second man said smoothly. The syndicate prefers not to escalate unnecessarily. Oliver's stomach tightened. He kept his voice steady. There's no reason for escalation. The taller Alpha's gaze slid back to him. You purchased stolen property. Alexander's jaw flexed slightly. I signed a legal protection contract, Oliver replied. There's nothing stolen about that. A thin smile. Contracts can dissolve. Not without cause. We can provide one. Silence stretched. Alexander stepped forward, just enough that his presence pressed into the doorway like a wall. You were told I was dead, he said evenly. Go back and confirm whether your new leader wants to gamble on being wrong twice. A flicker of something, unease, crossed the men's expressions. You're alone now, the taller one said. You don't have leverage. Alexander's voice dropped half a tone. Try me. For a split second, Oliver felt it. The shift in air, the instinctive dominance that rippled outward without visible movement. The two men straightened unconsciously. Then they stepped back. This isn't finished, the second Alpha said. It never is, Alexander replied. The hallway emptied. Oliver closed the door slowly. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Oliver turned. You weren't exaggerating. No, they're not just monitoring. No. Oliver exhaled slowly. Good. Alexander blinked. Good. It means they're nervous. Alexander studied him. You shouldn't be this calm. Oliver leaned against the door. If I panic every time someone knocks, I won't function. Alexander stepped closer. They won't stop at intimidation. I know. Oliver. Something in the way Alexander said his name made him look up. Leave, Alexander said quietly. End the contract. Tell Ethan you made a mistake. Oliver's pulse jumped. You think he'll forgive that? He'll control you, Alexander said bluntly. But you'll live. Oliver laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. You really don't understand, do you? Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. I wasn't living before, Oliver continued. I was negotiating my own cage. A silence settled between them, heavier this time. Alexander reached out, almost without thinking, and brushed his thumb along Oliver's jaw where tension had tightened the muscle. The touch was brief, gentle, uncalculated. You shouldn't have to choose between cages, he said quietly. Oliver's breath caught, not from fear, but from the intimacy of it. And you? Oliver asked. What are you choosing? Alexander's hand dropped slowly. I don't get choices, he replied. That's not true anymore. Before Alexander could respond, Oliver stepped forward and pressed his lips to him. This kiss wasn't careful like the last one. Carried tension, anger, fear, stubbornness. Alexander froze for half a heartbeat. Then his hands came up to Oliver's waist, steadying rather than claiming. When they parted, Alexander rested his forehead against Oliver's. If they touch you, Alexander said softly, I won't show restraint. I'm not asking you to, Oliver replied. Alexander pulled back slightly, searching his face. You don't know what that means. Then teach me. A faint, dangerous glint returned to Alexander's eyes. Not violence, but purpose. You're not leverage, he said. You're liability. I'm your partner, Oliver corrected. Outside, the black car's engine finally turned over. It drove away slowly. Alexander watched through the blinds. They're regrouping, he said. Then we prepare, Oliver replied. Alexander looked at him for a long moment, as if reassessing everything he had assumed. You're not afraid of me, he said finally. Oliver's mouth curved slightly. I was. And now. Oliver stepped closer, resting his hand lightly against Alexander's chest, feeling the steady strength beneath his palm. Now I'm more afraid of losing you. The words hung in the air between them. Alexander inhaled sharply, something shifting behind his eyes, something dangerously close to vulnerability. For the first time since being dragged in chains onto that warehouse stage, he felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Not rage, not survival, responsibility, and it terrified him more than the syndicate ever had. The second attempt came at night. No knock this time. Alexander woke before the sound fully formed, before the faint scrape of metal against the fire escape railing became distinct. His eyes opened into darkness, senses sharpening instantly. He was already on his feet when the bedroom door cracked open. "Stay inside," he whispered. Oliver was awake too. He didn't argue. Alexander moved without turning on lights. The apartment was mapped in his head: angles, blind spots, weak points. The reinforced fire escape lock held for half a second before a tool forced it. Two shadows slipped through the window. Professional. Quiet. Alexander stepped from the side, not the front. He struck first, low and fast. The first intruder hit the wall before he understood he'd been intercepted. The second swung wide. Alexander caught the wrist, twisted, drove him down hard into the floorboards. No wasted movement. No hesitation. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. The first man lunged again, drawing a blade. Alexander disarmed him with brutal efficiency and pressed him against the wall, forearm crushing his windpipe. "Who sent you?" Alexander asked calmly. The man choked but didn't answer. Alexander tightened pressure slightly. "Darius." A flicker in the man's eyes. Answer enough. Footsteps from the hallway. "Oliver." "Alexander," Oliver called softly. Alexander glanced back just long enough to ensure Oliver was unharmed. The distraction cost him. The second intruder kicked upward, catching Alexander in the ribs. Not enough to incapacitate, but enough to break hold. Both men scrambled toward the fire escape. Alexander could have pursued. He didn't. He shut and bolted the window instead. The apartment fell silent again. Oliver stood in the hallway, pale but steady. "Are you hurt?" Alexander shook his head once. Blood dotted the floor, not his. Oliver stepped closer. "They weren't here to talk." "No. They were here to confirm." "Yes." Oliver exhaled slowly. "Then it's official. You're alive to them." Alexander moved to the sink and rinsed blood from his hands. The water ran pink down the drain. His expression was unreadable. "They won't escalate immediately," he said. "They'll evaluate." Meaning Darius will want to see me himself." Oliver leaned against the counter. "Then why send foot soldiers?" "To test variables." "And what did they learn?" Alexander turned off the water. "That I'm not weakened. And," Alexander's gaze shifted to Oliver, "and that I hesitate." Oliver stilled. "Because of me." "Yes." The word didn't carry blame, just fact. A silence followed, heavier than before. Oliver stepped forward and pressed his palm flat against Alexander's abdomen where the kick had landed. "You're not supposed to hesitate," he said quietly. Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. "I never did. Before me." "Yes." Oliver's fingers curled slightly into his shirt. "And that's a problem?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. He walked past Oliver into the living room and stood near the darkened window. The city lights cast faint reflections along his profile. "I was efficient," he said at last. "I didn't consider outcomes beyond completion. And now I calculate survival beyond myself." Oliver watched him carefully. "You're not just a weapon anymore." Alexander let out a low breath. "You say that like it's simple." "It isn't," Oliver replied. "But you chose not to kill that witness. You chose not to chase those men tonight. You chose not to walk away from me." Alexander turned slowly. "I didn't walk away because leaving would make you easier to isolate," he said. "Don't romanticize it." Oliver stepped closer anyway. "I'm not romanticizing anything," he said softly. "I'm acknowledging change." Alexander's hand lifted, hovering at Oliver's waist again. But this time it settled there with more certainty. "You think you're strong," Alexander murmured. I am. Alexander's grip tightened slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to ground. You don't know what Darius will do. Then tell me. Alexander studied him for a long moment before speaking. Darius doesn't eliminate threats immediately, he said. He dismantles support first. Financial pressure, social isolation, legal harassment. He forces collapse. Oliver's chest tightened. Ethan. Yes. Oliver's phone buzzed as if summoned by the thought. A notification. Account frozen pending investigation. Oliver closed his eyes briefly. Fast, he murmured. They move through influence, Alexander said. Oliver opened his eyes again. Fear flickered there, but it didn't stay. Then we stop reacting, Oliver said. We go on offense. Alexander raised an eyebrow slightly. You want to confront them? I want to force their hand. You don't have leverage. Oliver stepped into Alexander's space, looking up at him steadily. Maybe I do. Alexander searched his face. You, Oliver said quietly. You're their liability. A faint, dangerous shift entered Alexander's expression. Darius built power by controlling you, Oliver continued. If people know you refused an order to kill an innocent, that changes narrative. Alexander's eyes sharpened. That's not enough. It's a start. Alexander's thumb brushed lightly over Oliver's hip. Absent-minded, thoughtful. You're thinking like a strategist, he said. I've been negotiating my survival for years, Oliver replied. A moment passed. Then Alexander pulled Oliver closer without warning. The movement wasn't rough, but it was decisive. You're asking to step into a war you don't fully understand, he said quietly. Oliver's hands rose, gripping the front of Alexander's shirt. I was already in one. Just quieter. Their faces were inches apart. Tension vibrated between them. Not fear, not anger, but intensity. Alexander lowered his head slightly, his voice dropping. If I lose control, he said, it won't be half measures. Oliver's breath hitched. Not from intimidation, but from proximity. Then don't lose it, he whispered. Alexander kissed him. Not careful. Not tentative. It wasn't violence, but it carried restraint stretched thin. His hands slid to Oliver's back, firm and steady, anchoring rather than overpowering. When he pulled away, his breathing was heavier. I won't hesitate next time, he said. Oliver didn't release his shirt. Good, he replied softly. Outside, the city moved as always. Cars passing, lights flickering, lives continuing. Inside the apartment, the line had shifted. They were no longer hiding. They were preparing. And somewhere in a high-rise office across town, Darius Cade was being informed that his former weapon had not only resurfaced, but had found something worth protecting. The pressure began quietly. Oliver noticed it in the small things first. His work shifts at the harbor bar were cut without explanation. A supplier suddenly refused to deliver to his building. The landlord, once indifferent, now avoided eye contact and muttered about liability clauses. By the third day, Oliver's bank account was not just frozen. It was under investigation for irregular activity. Alexander read the pattern immediately. He's isolating you, Alexander said, standing by the kitchen counter while Oliver stared at his phone screen. Darius doesn't attack directly when he can dismantle infrastructure first. And Ethan is helping him, Oliver replied flatly. Yes. Oliver set the phone down carefully, as if it might explode. So they squeeze until I panic. They expect you to break the contract. Oliver let out a short breath. Then we don't. Alexander's gaze held his. You may not have that luxury. Oliver looked up sharply. Don't start. I'm not abandoning you, Alexander said evenly. I'm calculating risk. And what does your calculation say? That I'm the trigger. Remove me, pressure decreases. Oliver stepped closer. You think Ethan will forgive humiliation? No, Alexander admitted. But he'll shift to controlled punishment rather than elimination. Oliver's jaw tightened. I won't go back. Alexander studied him in silence. The resolve in Oliver's eyes wasn't reckless. It was earned. Years of negotiating debt collectors, landlords, bureaucrats. This wasn't his first siege. Just the most dangerous one. The knock that came that evening wasn't from the syndicate. It was uniformed. Police. Mr. Vale, one officer said politely. We received an anonymous complaint regarding harboring a wanted felon. Oliver didn't flinch. On what charge? Assault. Organized crime affiliation. Alexander stood behind him in full view. The officer's gaze lingered, assessing. Identification, the officer requested. Alexander handed over the forged but legally viable ID he'd secured years ago as a precaution. The officer scanned it. No active warrant appeared. After a moment, the officer handed it back. We'll be monitoring, he said. When the door closed, Oliver exhaled slowly. They're escalating visibility, Alexander said. Trying to make neighbors uncomfortable. Let them, Oliver replied. But that night, Oliver couldn't sleep. Alexander found him sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. They'll come at my brother next, Oliver said quietly. Alexander leaned against the counter, watching him. Does he have ties to you financially? Indirectly. Then Darius won't risk public harm. Not yet. Oliver looked up. You sound certain. I know how he thinks. Silence fell between them. Finally, Oliver asked the question he'd been holding back. If they corner you, will you kill him? Alexander didn't answer immediately. If necessary, he said at last. Oliver swallowed. And after? There is no after in that world. Oliver stood abruptly and crossed the small space between them. I don't want you dragged back into it. I'm already in it, Alexander replied. Oliver grabbed his shirt, fists tight. No, you left it. They dragged you. Alexander's eyes darkened slightly. You're asking me to fight without finishing. I'm asking you to fight without losing yourself. The tension hung thick. Alexander's hands rose to Oliver's wrists, not forceful but steady. I don't lose control, he said. You already changed, Oliver replied softly. You hesitated. Alexander's grip tightened briefly before easing. That hesitation will get me killed. Or it will remind you what you're protecting. A beat passed. Then Alexander's phone vibrated. Private number. He stared at it for a second before answering. Darius's voice flowed smooth and amused through the speaker. You look healthy. Alexander's expression didn't shift. You're wasting resources. I'm evaluating outcomes, Darius replied. Return, and this ends quietly. Oliver stiffened slightly. Return to what? Alexander asked. To your position. Conditional reinstatement. Publicly, we correct the narrative. You were misled. A misunderstanding. And privately? You resume usefulness. Alexander's jaw flexed. You were my best asset, Darius continued. Don't let an omega distract you from relevance. Oliver's fingers tightened in Alexander's shirt. Alexander's voice cooled further. Threaten him again. A soft chuckle. You've grown sentimental. I've grown selective. Silence stretched on the line. Think carefully, Darius said. Your refusal costs more than your pride. The call ended. The apartment felt smaller. Oliver released Alexander's shirt slowly. He offered you your life back, Oliver said. Alexander's gaze didn't leave him. That wasn't my life. It was power. It was a leash. Oliver searched his face for doubt. There was none. Then what do you want? Oliver asked quietly. Alexander stepped closer until there was barely space between them. For the first time, he said, I want something that isn't assigned to me. Oliver's breath hitched. And that is. Alexander's hand slid to Oliver's waist again, firmer this time, not claiming but grounding. You. The word landed heavy. Oliver swallowed. They won't stop, he whispered. I know. They'll take everything. Alexander's thumb brushed slowly over Oliver's side. Then we take something back. Oliver lifted his chin slightly. We. Alexander's mouth curved faintly. You insisted on partnership. Oliver leaned in, pressing his forehead against Alexander's chest. Then we finish this, he murmured. Alexander wrapped his arms around him fully now, protective but controlled. Outside, the city lights flickered as usual. Inside, a decision had solidified. Not to survive quietly, not to retreat, but to confront. And for the first time since being dragged to that warehouse stage, Alexander wasn't fighting for reputation. He was fighting for a future he had chosen. The invitation arrived in a black envelope. No return address. No signature. Just a card embossed with a single line. Private Assembly Cade Syndicate. Attendance requested. Alexander stared at it for a long time before setting it down on the kitchen table. Oliver watched his expression carefully. That's not subtle. No, Alexander agreed. It's deliberate. Public. Internal. Senior members only. He paused. They want to measure loyalty. Oliver folded his arms. And they expect you to show up. Yes. Silence stretched between them. If you don't go, Oliver said, they escalate. Yes. If you go alone. I won't, Alexander cut in. Oliver's eyes sharpened. You think I'm staying behind? Alexander didn't answer immediately. I won't be used as leverage in another room while you play war council, Oliver said evenly. If this ends, it ends with both of us standing. Alexander stepped closer, studying him. This won't be a negotiation. It never was. A faint shift crossed Alexander's expression. Something like grim pride. You understand they might try to detain me. I understand, Oliver replied. And I understand you'll fight your way out. And you? Alexander asked quietly. Oliver met his gaze. I won't break. The meeting was held in an abandoned theater on the edge of the financial district. Once grand, now stripped of glamour, the building had been repurposed for quieter transactions. When they entered, conversations stilled. Men in tailored suits. Predators dressed like executives. Darius stood near the stage, immaculate in charcoal gray, hands clasped behind his back. He smiled when he saw them. Alexander, he said warmly. And the reason? Oliver didn't react. Alexander's voice was calm. You asked for presence. I'm here. Darius's gaze drifted over Oliver like an object appraisal. You're braver than you look. I'm not here to impress you, Oliver replied. A faint ripple moved through the room. Darius chuckled softly. Confidence. That explains the distraction. Alexander stepped half a pace forward, subtle, but unmistakably protective. Let's dispense with theatrics, Darius continued. You were offered reinstatement. I declined, Alexander said. Yes, Darius's eyes sharpened. For sentiment. For principle. The word hung in the air. Darius tilted his head. Principle is a luxury afforded by stability. You've chosen instability. Alexander didn't move. You built this organization, Darius went on. You know what happens to fractured leadership. Oliver spoke then, voice clear. You mean what happens when leadership lies? The room shifted again. Darius's smile thinned. Careful. No, Oliver replied. You're the one who should be careful. Alexander glanced at him briefly, surprised, but not displeased. Oliver continued. You framed him for refusing to kill a witness. That narrative doesn't strengthen you. It exposes you. A murmur began at the edges of the room. Darius's eyes hardened. Bold claims. Alexander stepped forward now, fully commanding the floor without raising his voice. I kept records. Darius's expression didn't change, but his stillness did. You assumed I'd destroy everything when I was taken, Alexander continued. I didn't. He removed a small drive from his coat pocket and held it up. Encrypted communication logs, task confirmations, authorization trails. Silence fell. Oliver felt the shift, the axis tilting. You would threaten internal collapse? Darius asked softly. I would correct it, Alexander replied. Darius's jaw tightened slightly. You won't walk out of here if you do. Alexander's eyes didn't leave his. Then you won't either. The standoff held. Then Darius's gaze moved to Oliver. Remove the omega, he said casually. Two men stepped forward. Alexander moved before they finished their first stride. The first man was on the floor in seconds. Breath knocked from him. The second barely had time to raise his arm before Alexander twisted it behind his back and forced him down hard. The room erupted into motion. Chairs scraped. Voices rose. Oliver didn't freeze. He moved. He had memorized the theater's layout from the building schematics Alexander had shown him the night before. Side exits. Narrow corridors. Blind corners. He slipped behind the seating rows and triggered the small device in his pocket. The theater's emergency lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room. Shouts filled the air. Alexander didn't need light. He moved through the chaos like muscle memory incarnate. Precise, controlled, dismantling resistance without fatal strikes. He wasn't here to slaughter. He was here to destabilize. Darius's voice rang out from somewhere near the stage. Lock the exits. Too late. Oliver had already opened the side corridor. He reached the backstage control panel and inserted a second drive, one containing pre-scheduled data releases routed to 3 separate contacts within the syndicate's financial wing. Proof. Insurance. The main lights flickered back on. Alexander stood center stage now, Darius a few feet away, guarded but exposed. Several members watched, not fighting. Calculating. Alexander's voice cut through the noise. This ends tonight, he said evenly. You framed me to eliminate dissent. You redirected funds under false authorization. You built loyalty on fear. Darius's composure cracked just slightly. And you built yours on blood. I never denied what I was, Alexander replied. You denied what you are. The silence this time was heavier. Oliver stepped out from the side corridor and walked to Alexander's side. Darius's eyes narrowed. You think sentiment makes you strong? Alexander didn't look at him. No, he said calmly. Choice does. A murmur moved through the room again. Phones began vibrating. Messages arriving. Evidence circulating. Darius saw it in their faces. The shift. He made one last attempt. You expose this and the organization fractures. You think external forces won't move in. Alexander met his gaze steadily. Then we rebuild. With him. Darius scoffed. Alexander's hand slid to Oliver's waist. Not possessive, but certain. With integrity. The word landed harder than a threat. Darius's shoulders lowered a fraction. The fight drained from the room. Not because Alexander had killed, but because he hadn't. Power had shifted without massacre. After a long moment, Darius gave a thin smile. You always did prefer clean lines. Not clean, Alexander corrected. Accountable. Security personnel, previously loyal to Darius, stepped forward cautiously. Not to attack Alexander. To stand between him and Darius. The room had chosen. Darius exhaled slowly. Very well, he said. Let's call this restructuring. Alexander held his gaze for one final beat. Then he stepped back. The war hadn't ended with bodies. It had ended with exposure. Outside the theater, the night air felt sharp and cold. Oliver finally let out the breath he'd been holding. You could have killed him, Oliver said quietly. Yes. Why didn't you? Alexander looked at him. Because I didn't want to win the way he does. Oliver stepped closer, searching his face. And now, Alexander's hand rose, brushing back a strand of Oliver's hair. Now, he said softly, I choose what I become. Oliver leaned in and kissed him. Slow, grounding, deliberate. Not adrenaline. Not desperation. Choice. For the first time since the warehouse stage, Alexander felt something unfamiliar settle inside him. Not rage. Not survival. Freedom. The fallout did not come in explosions. Came in silence. In the days after the theater assembly, the city did not burn. There were no headlines, no police raids, no public scandal. Cade's syndicate did what powerful organizations had always done best. It adjusted. Darius stepped down under the language of internal restructuring. Financial audits quietly began. Mid-level leadership shifted alliances. The data Alexander released had not destroyed the syndicate. It had forced it to shed rot. But power vacuums never stayed empty for long. And Alexander had been offered the throne again. He turned it down. Oliver was in the kitchen when the message arrived, an encrypted invitation to assume interim operational control. Alexander read it once and set the phone aside. "You're not even considering it?" Oliver asked, leaning against the counter. "I considered it," Alexander replied calmly. "And I don't want to spend the next 10 years proving I'm different." Oliver studied him. "You could change it." "Yes," Alexander agreed. "And in doing so, I'd still belong to it." Silence stretched between them. The apartment was quiet again. Repairs made. Accounts slowly thawing as Ethan's leverage dissolved under scrutiny. It turned out that when Darius's financial manipulations were exposed, several questionable partnerships came to light, including discreet dealings with Vance Holdings. Ethan Vance had called twice. Oliver hadn't answered. "You know he'll try something before he disappears," Alexander said quietly. "He already did," Oliver replied. "He sent flowers." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly. Oliver smirked faintly. "Cheap ones." A knock sounded at the door. Both of them went still. Not tense. Just aware. Alexander moved first, checking the peephole. "It's him," he said. Oliver inhaled slowly. "Good." Alexander glanced at him. "You don't have to." "I do," Oliver said firmly. He opened the door. Ethan stood in the hallway looking immaculate, though thinner than before. His usual composure was cracked at the edges. "You've made this very inconvenient," Ethan said coolly. Oliver crossed his arms. "You made it illegal." Ethan's gaze flicked past him toward Alexander, who stood in plain sight, silent and steady. "You could have ended this quietly," Ethan said. "You mean obediently," Oliver corrected. A beat passed. Ethan's jaw tightened. "You think he stays?" Oliver didn't look back. "That's not your concern." Ethan's eyes hardened. "You attached yourself to instability." Alexander stepped forward now, not aggressively, just enough that the hallway felt smaller. "He attached himself to choice," Alexander said calmly. Ethan held his gaze for a long moment. Then something in his posture shifted, not fear, but recognition. "You're not going back," Ethan said quietly. "No," Alexander replied. "And you're not reclaiming control." "No." A faint, incredulous laugh escaped Ethan. "You burned leverage for sentiment." Alexander didn't blink. "I burned it for clarity." Ethan looked at Oliver one last time. "You'll regret this," he said. Oliver tilted his head slightly. "Maybe. But it will be my regret." Ethan exhaled slowly. Then he left. The hallway felt lighter when the elevator doors closed. Oliver shut the door and leaned against it. "That's it?" he asked softly. "For him," Alexander said. "Yes." Oliver slid down until he was sitting on the floor. The adrenaline he hadn't acknowledged began to drain. Alexander crossed the room and crouched in front of him. "You're shaking," he observed quietly. "I know." Alexander reached out, brushing his knuckles lightly against Oliver's cheek. "You did well." Oliver laughed weakly. "I feel like I've been negotiating for weeks." "You have." Alexander shifted closer, sliding one arm around Oliver's shoulders and pulling him gently upright. Oliver leaned into him without hesitation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside their door continued. Cars passing, conversations rising and fading. But inside the apartment, the noise had finally stilled. "You could still leave," Oliver murmured against Alexander's chest. "You're free now." Alexander rested his chin lightly against Oliver's hair. "I was free the night you signed that contract," he said quietly. Oliver pulled back slightly to look at him. "That was a transaction. It became a choice." Oliver's fingers tightened in Alexander's shirt. "I didn't buy you," he said softly. Alexander's hand moved to Oliver's waist, firm and sure. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." Silence lingered. "Are you sure?" Oliver asked after a moment. "About what?" "About not rebuilding it. Not reclaiming power." Alexander considered that carefully. "I know how to dismantle," he said at last. "I don't know how to build something that isn't built on fear." Oliver tilted his head. "Then build something smaller," he said. "Start there." Alexander studied him. "You're not afraid of living quietly?" he asked. Oliver smiled faintly. "I've never lived quietly. I've survived loudly in small rooms." Alexander's mouth curved slightly. "Then what does that look like?" he asked. Oliver leaned back against the couch, pulling Alexander down beside him. "It looks like work that doesn't require blood," he said. "Maybe security consulting. Maybe exposing corruption legally instead of eliminating it." Alexander's eyebrow lifted faintly. "You've planned this." "I've thought about it." Alexander lay back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. "For the first time," he said slowly, "I don't feel like I'm waiting for impact." Oliver turned his head to look at him. "Good," he said. Alexander shifted onto his side, propping himself on one elbow. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "What?" "Buying me." Oliver smiled, slow, certain. "No." Alexander's hand slid gently to Oliver's jaw, thumb brushing along the line of it. "You changed the trajectory of my life," he said. "So did you." Their foreheads touched. This kiss was different from the others. No tension, no urgency, just warmth. Deliberate. When they pulled apart, Alexander rested his forehead lightly against Oliver's again. "I don't belong to anyone," he said softly. Oliver's lips curved. "Good," he replied. "Because I don't want to own you." Alexander exhaled slowly, something uncoiling fully for the first time. "I choose you," he said. Oliver didn't hesitate. "I choose you back." Outside, the city continued as it always had, imperfect, volatile, alive. Inside the small apartment near the harbor, a contract that had begun as protection had transformed into something neither of them had intended. Not ownership, not leverage, not survival. Choice. And this time it was theirs. Thank you for following Oliver and Alexander's journey. From a desperate contract signed in fear to a choice made in love. What began as survival became something deeper. Trust, loyalty, and the courage to walk away from power for something real. If the story moved you, let me know your thoughts. Would you have made the